Hey everyone, I'm Scott Cunningham, aka Scott C Business. Today I'm here with Richard Sanders from Cipherblade. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Richard Sanders. I'm the CSO and co-founder of Cipherblade. I'm a military veteran with over a decade of wartime service, and I'm continuing the mission that was instilled in me, essentially trying to clean up the entire blockchain industry.
Awesome, awesome. So, how busy are you now? Like, slash, what does your day look like on an average day?
I hate to say very busy because that's kind of the cookie cutter answer that it seems almost everybody in this industry seems to give. And busy doesn't inherently mean that somebody's doing things that are impactful. And I don't mean to sound like judgmental with that, but I've seen people that work 40-hour weeks and they get more done than people that work 80-hour weeks, right?
Yeah,
And
fair
as
enough.
somebody that worked, 60 to 80-hour work weeks for a decade and noticing the toll that took on my health, I'm pretty adamant about not doing that. Unfortunately, in this line of work, there are urgencies that will kick off that will result in me having sleepless nights. But it's a balance, right? So like I'll kind of offset that by working a little bit less the following week. Another great example would be actually relevant to you, being Canadian. I was just recently in Toronto doing an on-site solvency audit for a cryptocurrency exchange. And while I'm out there, I'm dealing with the same stuff anyone in this industry deals with when they travel. The accumulating DMs and emails. But while I'm out there, the CSA and OSC want to meet with me on no notice. So pretty high impact. I have to do that. And then as I'm dealing with all that, trying to do a solvency audit in a day and a half, there's a $5 million OTC deal that gets botched and my Telegram's blowing up. So there's very, very high tempo times. But as somebody that's very big on health and mindfulness, I think those are very core things that I've noticed there are folks in this industry that are really huge on, especially meditation. Huge advocate of that. But it's all balance. And as far as like the average day bit, the thing that I probably love amongst the highest of aspects of what I do is that there is no such thing as an average day because I wear different hats. I'm an investigator, but I also write these forensics reports. So in a sense, I also play analyst. I also work with a lot of attorneys, so I do a lot of legal stuff too, and it keeps things very refreshing and interesting.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a lot, no doubt. I definitely have noticed there's a lot more people uh, going a little bit, pulling a little bit back and focusing more on work-life balance rather than just, going all out into it. And like you said, I mean, you could get a more productive work week by ensuring you have that balance so that you're not just busy, but you're actually working and getting things done. So could you give us a little bit of a brief introduction to Cipherblade?
Sure. So Cipherblade is a blockchain investigation and security company, and we're most well known for our investigations into scams or hacks. And that is the brunt of what we do. It's exclusively thus far word of mouth referral. We have not spent a single penny on marketing or advertising. Um, that's largely because there's just nobody else that does that sort of work. So we also do other assorted services. We do ICO advisory. We do expert witness work for attorneys. I'm a credentialed expert witness, so that's been pretty high demand. But just kind of due to the nature of the industry, which I think we're going to talk about later, it's a lot more reactive than proactive work at this time.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What gave you the idea to start this, or when did you begin to start formulating the idea for starting Cipherblade?
So it's kind of a funny story, but I'll try to keep it super TLDR version. In 2017, I was working for this ICO in a completely unrelated role. And I'm sure you're familiar with all those impersonation scammers on Telegram that will just pretend to be someone with the project and, yeah, send your investment to this ETH wallet.
Yeah.
So in that project, I kind of got memed. A lot of the community members made a meme of essentially me just screwing with these scammers, sending them malicious files or rickrolling them or doxing them and reporting them to law enforcement. So I had like a kill count going that the community made. And one day out of the blue, this community member starts calling me. I was actually at the local VA hospital visiting a friend of mine that was just getting out of surgery, and my Telegram is just blowing up, and I have no idea what's going on. This guy is freaking out that he lost 1,000 Ethereum in a scam, and I was like, "Does this have anything to do with the project?" He's like, "No, but you're the only person I could think of to help." So, long story short, that money ended up getting back. I figured out who did it and solved that situation. On the spot, someone within that individual's network said, um, there's nobody else doing this in the industry. So, salary and all those other items aside, would you be interested in doing this full time? And that sense of purpose and that mission really resonated with me. So between a combination of that and just continued word of mouth, everyone before Cipherblade was even a thing just seemed to come to me whenever they were scammed or hacked. It was just born out of necessity.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's definitely relevant with like quadrisex and everything that's been happening in the past year or so. Um, so what's up next for Cipherblade?
I would like the transition more to preventative security than reactive investigation. That's kind of the super high level overview. And I think that later on we'll be talking about like some obstacles to mass adoption, problems in the industry. But right now, I guess the best way to summarize that briefly is that if I go to a conference and I give out my business card, the majority of the time the reaction I get is, oh, well, if I ever get scammed or hacked, I know a guy now. It's very rarely do you offer training, do you do advisory. Now, we do get a lot of demand, especially for advisory, but those projects are kind of in the minority that have the proper priorities and the right mentality. So I think kind of in alignment with that, in order to get to the point where we get more demand for proactive than reactive services, unfortunately, it's going to require a what's up next for the industry instead of what's up next for Cipherblade.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It would definitely make sense that there'll be a big shift to prevention rather than just reaction. And I think as more and more cases come out where people are losing like 1,000 ETH, it's going to become more and more relevant to put these measures in place. So, what are some of the biggest problems that you've seen in the industry currently, aside from the ones that you've already pointed out?
To kind of build off the last question that has some application here, another direction that Cipherblade is going to be going is providing more training and essentially making more people like me. Because right now my bus factor is extremely high. There's very few people that do what I do specifically. So I'm currently in discussion with a local university, and I might actually end up teaching a course as an adjunct. In general, a large part of what I do is working with law enforcement on these cases, and they will come to me on cases I'm not necessarily handling by a Cipherblade, asking for my expertise. And that's not a dig on law enforcement. They're doing the best I can, or the best they can rather. And the best way to kind of paint a picture of what they're dealing with would be, imagine if somebody came to you right now and said, your plant's dying. Do you really know what to do? You'd have to figure it out on the spot and research a bunch of these things. That's what a lot of these law enforcement professionals are dealing with. They don't have background in cyber, a lot of these folks, and then
Hmm.
they're having these blockchain cases thrown at them. So it's entirely understandable. Another great example I'll give there: if somebody is scammed or hacked, the majority of people, at least relative to like U.S. citizens, have no idea where to even report this stuff. And it would be an IC3 report. Most people don't even know what that is. Local police departments don't even know what that is most of the time. If people actually do even try to report this stuff to law enforcement, local and state law enforcement won't even know. And it requires a lot of training. So that is, I mean, it kind of ties into what's next for Cipherblade, but the big problems in the industry when it comes to the fact that people just generally don't feel secure, right? So I think of the issues that the industry faces, at least when it comes to mass adoption. There's two major problems, and I think that it's very comparable to what we saw with the internet in the early to mid 90s. One is ease of use. So like these days, you can send me a picture of your lunch. I don't need to know what an IP address is. I just look at this. I see the picture. I don't need to know what a JPEG file is. I just know it works, right? Early
Hmm.
to mid 90s, the average person didn't want to mess with IP addresses or file extensions. So we need to get the technology to that point. That's not my problem to solve. The other 50%, that was a problem back then, and it's a problem now, is that people generally just didn't feel safe using that technology, right? So if you look at what like the eBays and the Amazons and the PayPals did, they increased compliance initiatives. They didn't wait to be regulated, they self-regulated. They added folks that were, if not investigators, fraud prevention and fraud analysts to their teams. And you don't see that in the blockchain industry, which is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. So in order to get that mass adoption that we talk about just repetitively in this industry, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we definitely need to get those regulations in place um, to just prevent things like quadrisex from happening, and all the different issues that people are facing in the industry today. I think it'll be really, really relevant establishing this and building this out a lot more to make people feel more secure in their dealings with crypto. So what are some of the or sorry, I guess before that, what are some changes that you expect to see in the industry over the next year or two?
It's gonna come from a combination of a couple of things. So we were kind of just discussing how public expectation is going to steer a part of it via self-regulation, and that's going to come both from consumer facing and a kind of like corporate peer pressure, right? So you mentioned a Quadriga a couple times, and I think that's actually a fantastic example. um, People didn't do their due diligence before they utilized that exchange, and unfortunately that was a norm in this industry, especially during 2017. It would never work in any other industry. So I think that on one hand, there's going to be more consumer expectation of, we want to know who your team is. The public's going to do their own kind of like armchair investigator background stuff, which is fine. Yeah, if that was done in the Quadriga case before any of this happened, it would have prevented it. But I
Mm.
think kind of larger scale, what the public is going to look for is things like solvency audits, right? So like Kraken just did a solvency thing, which was fantastic. BitBuy, Canadian exchange, just did one actually with us, which is fantastic. I think the public's going to expect that more. But I'm also a realist, and these companies aren't necessarily going to become obsolete just by premise of people speaking with their cryptocurrency. I do think that in addition to the public pressure and the corporate pressure, there will have to be some regulation that takes place. And I would like to see that minimized as much as possible. But again, just kind of being a realist and knowing human nature, we're not going to, yeah, we could have 10 more Quadrigas. And at the end of the day, there's still going to be people that try to do the same thing. So there will
Mm.
have to be some regulation.
Yeah, and yeah, the reason I mention it is just because it's really relevant to Canadians here, yeah, it's a great example of why this is so relevant, and why it makes so much sense to have these preventative measures and just better investigation as a reactive measure as well.
I
So,
will say this, kind of chiming in about Canada specifically. I've been very impressed with how the CSA and OSC are handling this. They put out a document recently. It's essentially the equivalent of an RFI. And they're looking for the answers, right? They're not trying to put on this image of knowing more than they know. And I think that's really the optimal approach to take here. Because if we overregulate, we're going to stunt this technology, and that's something we all want to avoid. So they're
mhm.
asking the right questions. How do we set this expectation for transparency, for solvency? And I think that something blockchain companies should be doing, especially if they have presence in Canada, is having these conversations with the CSA and OSC. I mean, they have a board going for this, which I might actually try to join. And I'm not even a Canadian citizen, obviously, but we all need a seat at this table. As companies across the entire industry within our respective jurisdictions, we need to be having these conversations.
Yeah, no doubt. And yeah, hopefully more companies follow suit and start to, invest in these reactive and preventative measures to, prevent issues like these from happening, and, working with these boards to just improve the industry in general. So what are some obstacles that you see coming for mass adoption? Like we talked a little bit about it, but if you'd like to expand a little bit more on that.
Well, I think we kind of hit the key points on that. The big thing is that the one key point we didn't hit on is that we're dealing with decentralization, right? And that has an inherent responsibility on both the end user and blockchain businesses to do things differently than we have historically done. And on one hand, we can definitely increase how government, regulators, law enforcement handle this stuff. It's not to say that they can't continue to have involvement. They absolutely could and should. On the other hand, though, it's just simply not realistic to maintain the levels of protection via centralization that we've kind of grown accustomed to as a global society, which has an inherent responsibility, especially on the end users. And I'm not talking necessarily just in terms of fraud prevention, right? Like, simple baseline things like storing your private key safely. Those are things
Mhm.
that are going to need to become kind of public expectation. But I'm also looking at in terms of investment. I've been spending a grotesque amount of time these past 6 months going after just post mortem on these ICOs of 2017, early 2018. And it comes down to just generally if you're looking at something and seeing if it makes sense. If a project is telling you, yeah, we're going to spend 50% of the raised funds on project development, platform development, whatever the case might be, 10% on marketing, but you're noticing that you go to a conference and they have all these booth babes and they didn't really deliver much of anything as far as a viable product, kind of common sense indicating, and that those situations, by the way, can be prevented by looking at some of the history of these folks. So short answer again, the big obstacle right now is just ensuring that people are putting in the time to educate themselves and do their research.
Yeah, for sure. Totally agree. Um, so a little outside of what we've been talking about, but maybe still somewhat relevant. What are your thoughts on censorship and free speech and everything that's been sort of happening in the media and social media lately? And does it have any effect on what you're doing, or is that just something completely separate?
So that's a complex one because it reaches out and touches a lot of areas, and obviously not just this industry. So for a little bit of context, I live in Pittsburgh, which is where that synagogue shooting had happened.
Mm.
And I'm trying to remember the name of the social media platform. It was the Twitter spinoff as the individual used. I'm drawing a blank right now. I'm sure I'll find it.
Gab, maybe,
That
or
was it, Gab. And yeah, there was a lot of controversy about that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, speech should be free, but people should also be accountable for what they say. That's the first of two key points I'm going to make here. So, what I mean by that is that everyone has the right to their opinions, but this is more specific to the blockchain industry. Um, People also have the right to destroy your stance with logic, and you should be
yeah,
accountable for that. So, what I see right now, specific to the blockchain industry, is there's a lot of keyboard warriors, especially on Twitter, that hide behind these pseudonyms. And the only reason they do that is because they're completely obnoxious. They're absolutely unable to achieve paradigm shift via intellectual discourse. And they're behind those pseudonyms because they would just be entirely unemployable if they weren't. I
yeah,
ignore those folks personally, but I think that the industry should do better to ignore them. Kind of external to the blockchain industry is my second point here. I don't think it's government's place to censor free speech, and definitely not to become the thought police. So I do think that within reason, evidence capture points for attribution are important, right? And what I mean by that is that if people want to have the choice to operate on a pseudonym, that's totally fine. And as long as they're not doing very select things, then that attribution or attribution-less nature should still be possible. But there has to be some level of limitations that I think that the general public would agree with, right? So if you want to have controversial views on any political figure, by all means, go for it. If you want to go on Twitter and put out death threats, then there has to be a line there. And that line shouldn't just be, we're going to ban the account. There should be an evidence capture point. Especially, and again, I think these are things that, both sides, or any side, if you want to think of it in kind of a nonlinear political direction, would agree with, right? So like recruiting for terrorist organizations, inciting hate crime, financing any of these racist or terror groups. Those are things I think that the majority of people could agree should be
hmm
stopped with something more than we're just going to ban the account.
hmm yeah. No, that totally makes sense. It's just there's just been so many issues going on with censorship, and I just feel it was relevant. It's really relevant to talk about, especially with blockchain and how they're attempting to solve sort of issues with centralization and how that affects censorship, but definitely still need to be mindful of things that are obviously illegal, like incitement to violence and various things like that of that nature. um, so jumping a little bit back into Cipherblade, how is Cipherblade different from other companies within your same space?
Well, I would say that there's no other company that quite does what we do, at least yet. And what I mean by that specifically is that there's no blockchain investigative company that exists besides ours. I would love to see that change in the future. I would love to see competition. I know that makes me a very poor businessman, but the industry needs it. We're often clumped into kind of the same basket as companies like Chainalysis or Cipher Trace or Elliptic, but those are companies that offer blockchain forensic solutions, right? And we utilize their solutions in what we do. But what those companies don't offer is like ICO advisory or expert witness work, or the biggest thing that we get requested all the time, which is, hey, I got scammed or hacked, please help me.
Mm.
Those are tools. So we're quite a lot different from those. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's really the key differentiator is that there's no company to compare us to.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. You guys are definitely very unique in your space. Um, do you, and I think that's really great that you want some competition to some regard. It's like how Elon Musk says, I want there to be on an electric powered car regardless of who makes it. And he's still sort of leading the industry for doing so. So it's not detrimental to want that competition because because you care about the industry and how things are actually progressing more than just your own skin, really. So where do you see the company going in the next year and in the next like 5 years?
Over the next year, I could see us transitioning again more onto the legal front because I think that that ties in with stuff on the law enforcement side. I think that, and again, not only do I just really enjoy doing that kind of work personally, but as far as impact on it, right? If I'm able to educate legal professionals and law enforcement professionals, then more of these situations are going to get handled. And again, that's not for Cipherblade's benefit, that's for industry-wide benefit. Um, I'm really interested in continuing to pursue education in general. That thing, with teaching as an adjunct, that might not be within the year time frame. I guess we'll see. I'm going to strive to make it so. But over the next 5 years, once those kind of steps are in place, right, where we have more legal professionals and law enforcement professionals, and kind of in my utopia where not just me is the one teaching the course, but there's more people that have enough training and ultimately get at least a few years of experience doing this, and they can teach themselves or they can teach others. I would kind of like to see 5 years from now multiple Cipher blades out there, and I would like to see somebody at every FBI field office that is as proficient in this as I am. Somebody, and this shouldn't just be federal, by the way, this should be local and state. So I'd like to see somebody in every law firm, if they're going to offer services that can reach out and touch this industry, that can at least speak to this stuff to some degree. So that's where I want to see it go in 5 years. Once that does happen, 5 years from now, I think it's going to set a very strong precedent for, okay, the society has kind of moved more into a we're more prepared role. So I think that 5 years from now, I'll be doing a lot more ICO advisory and preventative stuff with Cipherblade. That's the goal.
Awesome. Awesome. Can you share any interesting cases that you worked on or any cool stories?
So I'll share the one that people seem to like the most, and it was when I was casing this group of simjackers. And long story short of it, this group of simjackers were actually the ones that were also responsible for breaching Ian Bellina, which is how I got introduced to the case. And long and short of it is I got led to a Discord server based upon a moniker they were using on other platforms. And at this time, this was early on in the case, we knew very little about these folks besides the fact that they were the ones that had breached Ian and allegedly were involved in some other bad stuff like simjacking. And all in all, the simjacking ring, just based off of the figures that I have from victims that I have found, was responsible for over $200 million in theft. I mean, we're not talking peanuts here.
Wow.
But all I had to work with was this Discord server and just monikers, right? But I kind of reviewed, okay, they're playing games, kind of how they're talking, and I assessed they're probably younger males. And of course, they're dropping all that wannabe thug gangster stuff, talking about e-girls. So the way that I actually assisted largely in taking down this massive $200 million simjacking ring is I used a burner account and what's referred to as, might want to edit this out, I'm not sure if this is kosher enough for your stream, but it's called an e-whoring pack, which is essentially a set of pictures with a female doing different things in varying states of undress, hold up 2 fingers, 3 fingers, whatever the case might be, so they think it's you. And I've got both a software and a hardware voice changer here.
Wow.
So I made an alter ego. Her name was Alyssa, and she was a 19-year-old female video gamer with a very dazzling personality, let's say. And these individuals began to chat me up, and with time, this was not much time, they were pretty desperate, I guess. I thought it was going to take me a lot longer. They began to tell me more about themselves. I would ask kind of probing questions, what do you do? They're trying to flex and impress me. I've got all this money. Eventually, they just start telling me everything. We did this simjack the other week, where they live, their real names, the works. So
Wow.
if you Google Sim Swappers arrested and you see like Joseph Harris or Joel Ortiz or any of those guys, it's pretty funny. Like some of the pictures you'll see in these articles were ones that were actually submitted to me. Like they sent me their freaking KYC pictures, which I thought was hilarious.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And it really goes to show that a lot of it can be done just with social engineering. A
There's a
lot of the
lot of
times.
irony in that, isn't there? That
Yeah.
a great way to take down social engineers is to social engineer them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a crazy story for sure. I'm sure a lot of people watching this are familiar with the Ian Bellina case. So yeah, I think that's extremely relevant and definitely a really cool a really cool little story to share. I won't bleep it out or anything, so no worries about that. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the audience that's watching for this?
Just continue to do your own research, right? And generally, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. You know, the best bit of advice I can give is that things that have been historically business practice in other industries, probably as a generality, should apply here. If you don't know who the person is, don't send them your money. If you don't have a contract, don't send them your money. If you don't know for sure where they're residing, if there is a flight risk of this person, if you wouldn't know who to call to report the crime, just be more careful. This industry has a lot of potential and a lot of impact. I really believe in this technology, which is why I'm putting all of this work into doing one of the huge things that needs to be done for it to be adopted. But I can't do this alone. This has to be an industry-wide effort, and everyone here, every viewer is a part of it.
Awesome. All right. Well, you guys heard it here. Make sure you go and check out Cipherblade. And thank you so much for watching. I'm sure there's a lot of value in this. A lot of people need to take their security a lot more seriously, so that we can all work in a secure, safe environment and just enjoy using blockchain and crypto. And again, so thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure.
Awesome.